Connecticut and Massachusetts, Z&M Homes buys houses. Sell your property to the local guys.
Needs repairs, updates, maybe foreclosure or inherited? No problem. We gotcha. Google or add us on Facebook at ZANDMHomes.com.
It's Baxy's Musical Podcast.
In April of this year, I had this amazing conversation with the legendary Jim Skafish. In 1976, Jim and his band, Skafish, would single-handedly become the first punk or new wave or avant-garde band in Chicago. During that conversation, Jim and I talked at length about the music of Skafish getting a rebirth after being out of print and largely unavailable for the last 40 years. But since 2019, Skafish has been working on reintroducing this brilliant but largely unheard bank of music and getting it back into circulation. Now, in my own opinion, had circumstances been different, their 1979 debut album would have been considered to be a groundbreaking classic. It certainly deserved to be. Unfortunately, things don't always work out the way they should. Part of the problem with being ahead of your time is the risk of being wildly misunderstood. Skafish was not only shocking in how they looked, they sang about subjects that at the time were seen as very controversial and taboo. It's only now, after spending years of trying to obtain the rights to his previous records, that audiences are getting a chance to finally judge for themselves what Skafish was all about. The music was astonishing and complex and thrilling, even when they were addressing complicated subject matter in the lyrics. And as I said to Jim last April, that 1979 debut album is quickly becoming one of my all-time favorites. But to make that vision come to light, Jim needed to find world-class musicians to join in. And Jim will be the very first to tell you he surrounded himself with some of the most astounding musicians that he could find. That included my guest today, who Jim Skafish called one of the greatest drummers in the world, a man who Miles Copeland of IRS Records once referred to as his second favorite drummer, only behind his brother Stuart from the Police. That guy is Larry Mysliwiec. Larry is a graduate from the DePaul University School of Music. He played with Jim Skafish from 1976 to 1985, but he also became a touring member for another musical visionary, Iggy Pop, in 1981. Now, I will tell you that as someone who plays drums, listening to Larry Mysliwiec play on that first Skafish record and the amazing What's This compilation, you begin to realize that Jim Skafish and Miles Copeland were not kidding about this guy. Larry Mysliwiec is that kind of drummer. So when I had a chance to talk to him, I absolutely was not going to pass that up. This is my conversation with drummer Larry Mysliwiec from his lake house in northern Wisconsin on Baxy's Musical Podcast. You're in Tomahawk. You couldn't get away. You couldn't get further away from people if you tried.
So you're familiar with Tomahawk?
I am I've never been to Tomahawk, but I've been to Wausau, Rhinelander, Minocqua, Eagle River. I've been up there, but I don't remember. I don't recall ever being up in Tomahawk. I spent 11 years in Milwaukee.
Okay.
Going through, went to college at Marquette, and then once I graduated, I ventured out of the big city for a while and found myself in like Door County and what's the name of the lake over there?
Well, the biggest lake in Tomahawk is Nokomis.
Yes, that's it.
There's 1,000 lakes. I'm on Lake Alice, which is part of the Wisconsin River. And Tomahawk, I came up here with my two kids, son and daughter. My wife stayed home with the dog, the chickens, and the cat and all that. She don't like to travel too much. So I come up here with them sometimes. And I've been coming up to Tomahawk since I was probably 8 years old or so. My family used to come up here to Lake Manson and rent cabins when we were kids,
Yeah.
So I'm kind of fond of this place. But, yeah, we went to Rhinelander. We went to Minocqua. We drive around. And Timms Hill is like the highest point in Wisconsin. We went there yesterday,
I'm not outdoorsy enough to go trolling for muskies. I'm much better at catching like lake perch on a plate.
We've been trying to fish. Because we get a boat comes with the cabin, you pay for it. But we're not having too much luck on Lake Alice. We have better luck on Manson. Well, we caught some bluegill. I caught a perch yesterday. She caught a big suckerfish and a bass, but I'm not cleaning anything. We're just catching, releasing. I'm kind of done with a lot of that cleaning and stuff. But I mean, if I caught something really, some nice perch, I probably would have had a perch dinner.
Of course you would. It's so great to talk to you because my discovery of Skafish it's kind of like it's got a bit of a route here. I first saw or learned of Skafish when I was at Marquette at the campus radio station. When I talked to Jim, I kind of explained this, and then once the reissues came out in 2019, and I actually got a chance to really listen to this music, I could not believe what I was hearing, and I couldn't believe how much I enjoyed it and how ahead of its time it was, and even today, when you look back at those days now, how do you see what Skafish was all about, and the vision that Jim had for that band?
Well, I'll be honest. The way I got hooked up with Jim was, I went to DePaul University to study music, percussion, and all that, and I got my degree, and I started teaching drums at a local music store, in Hammond, Indiana. And I get a call one day from Jim, and he says, "Hey, I'd like you to come in." This is 1976. He says, "I'd like you to come and try for my band. I got a unique band I'm putting together." And see, I've always been into off the wall music. I mean, I was conventional. My first records were, of course, Beatles, and that's why I started playing drums and rock. But my first like was like Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention and Captain Beefheart and things like that. So when Jim called me, I didn't know what to expect. I went down to his basement. I started to he threw some songs at me. I don't even remember what they were, if they were his or covered. And I played, and I says, "Well, what's the story?" He goes, "Well, your name's been popping up. Every time I ask, I'm looking for a drummer, somehow your name comes up." I go, "Well, that's interesting, So after hearing him, I thought, man, this is something different. This is not, I'm not going to be playing the blues or playing the Stones or, anything conventional. This is something I think I'm really going to like, because I was, like I say, into things that were not that conventional, and I wanted to step out into something that was more unique. I had a little bit of history in jazz, of course, going to DePaul University. That's where some of the guys in Chicago studied. And
right.
So I was into like Buddy Rich, Joe Morello, the drummers like Jack DeJohnette. So when Jim called me and I finally saw it, I was interested, but I'm thinking, what the hell is this? I couldn't actually figure it out at first.
People say that, Skafish was the first punk band in Chicago. I mean, this is 1976. I mean, punk hadn't even been given a name yet. There's no context for this kind of music. And really, in my mind, it's avant-garde music. And at the time...
It is.
Yeah. And
it is. It's not punk. It's not punk. I mean, punk is, I guess, described as very harsh guitars and fast pumping drums. And, of course, he had that. But he had so much more of a unique flavor to his music. I mean, it did transcend rock and roll, went into jazz and avant-garde and classical. And Jim, I don't know if a lot of people know this, but he is just a phenomenal piano player. He's like a Liberace in my eyes. He can play. So that's what attracted me to it. I mean, it was so much more, and I liked jazz. I liked things like that, and I saw the potential, but I also saw that this was going to be very hard to sell, because those were the days of what we called then dinosaur music. That was, Journey and, all the bands that were just playing conventional, really good rock and roll, but conventional rock and roll. And this was something totally off the wall, especially Jim's unique appearance and demeanor.
And you're right about that. I mean, you think about the bands that were specific to Chicago at the time. REO Speedwagon and Styx, and at least like Cheap Trick, for example, had a unique look. But there was nothing like Skafish anywhere whether it's Chicago or anywhere in the country. And you couldn't have asked for anything more shocking and seemingly dangerous than to have a band sing songs like "Sign of the Cross" or "Executive Exhibitionist." I mean, these are songs that maybe topics that Zappa might have covered later in his career. But, I mean, these were way out there at the time and remarkably courageous to be singing about stuff like this.
Absolutely. And, his appearance shocked people. And, I think, one of the things that for the most part, for normal people, I would say normal rock people, turned them off. I mean, I recall a show we did in Rockford, and Cheap Trick was a fan of ours. I don't know how they became connected, but they were a fan of ours. And we did a show in Rockford one night, and it was probably January or February, I can't remember. But they started to throw snowballs at Jim and us at the stage, you know. And all of a sudden, Rick Nielsen from Cheap Trick steps up in front of the stage and challenges them and says, you know, knock it off or you're going to be dealing with me. And that's when they were just rising to their fame. It was probably 77, 78, I don't know. And he held the crowd off and told them, knock it off. I like this band. And it was pretty cool, you know.
When I talked to Jim back in April, we talked quite a lot about some of those early shows. And my thought in all of that and hearing some of the reactions that people had about this band, as a member of this band, did you ever think to yourself, hey, maybe this is just a bit too much for me to want to stick around in? I mean, I could get my ass kicked or killed. Did you?
Well, two things about that. There were ups and downs. I mean, you know, we were turned down by record companies. Oh, that's just too much. I remember Robin McBride recorded a 4-song demo and took it to Mercury Records, and they threw him out of the boardroom. I mean, we're not signing this garbage. You know, this isn't Journey or Styx or. So I mean, there were a lot of ups and downs, but one of the pluses was when Scott Cameron took us on. Scott was our manager, and he had at the time he was managing Willie Dixon, Muddy Waters, Mighty Joe Young, and Stan Kenton. I mean, these were all blues and big band, and he took us on because he told a friend of his he wanted to delve into the rock and roll. And he came down to Jim's basement, and it was just so weird. We let him down to the basement, someone did, and we played like 4 songs. And he kind of stood there or sat there with his mouth open. I mean, but a few days later, he took us on. I mean, he saw the potential too, but he also saw it was going to be hard to sell this band. And he tried and tried and tried until finally Miles Copeland with his International Record Syndicate, IRS Records, Miles was the manager of the Police. He took us on and signed us to a record deal, and that was the major up.
I want to talk to you about Miles Copeland just a little bit because obviously he plays a pretty significant role in your career. Did Miles himself see you guys first, or was he told? Wasn't it his other brother Ian that had seen you guys first?
You would have to ask Jim that. I can't remember how Miles became connected with us. If he saw a show, I'm assuming so. Because there was really not much. I mean, there was we did, like I say, those demos and stuff, but I don't know if he saw a show or Scott Cameron talked to him, but he had to have seen us or heard something significant to want to sign us. But he was in that stage, Miles was in that stage where he was looking for new wave bands, bands other than the conventional bands. And that's when he started signing us and the Go-Go's and, bands like that. And so, yeah, I think he probably saw a show.
I hope the one he went to was the Sean Anna show.
That was crazy. Right. Yeah. A crowd that came for a convention, very, very conservative moms and pops and daughters and sons. And we're on stage and Jim is, doing his thing. And finally, I think after about half hour or so on the show, they just shut us down. They told us, no, get off the stage. And it was, but that was a crazy show. Yeah.
You mentioned, some of the visuals that the band had, but one of the things that's very striking about Skafish particularly is the lyrical content. And like I said before, I mean, you're talking about things that, bands, actually not even just bands, just in general, these kind of conversations just didn't happen. Sex abuse scandals in the church, pedophilia, exhibitionism, bullying, fat shaming, gender identity, all these things that are probably 25, 30 years, off from being actually part of a national discussion. At the time, to hear these things being talked about or sung about in 76, 77, the reactions to that also had to be strong, not just visually, but lyrically, people had to react to that stuff.
Absolutely. And I think those that listened to the lyrics were very shocked by it. For the most part on the shows, I don't know if they were listening or hearing the lyrics actually, but were so stunned by what was happening on stage that was all it took to get the eggs being thrown and the bottles and the other things that were thrown throughout our early career there. But I think that the lyrics, for those who listen to it, it was like, what is this? I mean, see, Jim's music was basically him. I mean, it was what he experienced as a child growing up, because he was different from the day he was born. And as you know, but from talking to him, his parents took him to psychiatrists. He was the black sheep of the family, so to say. And so all these things, being bullied in school and, even laughed at by the teachers, that had a tremendous element in why he reacted such with his music. But with his music, besides the lyrics, he set it to like a type of music that was so refined. I mean, his keyboard playing, Javier Cruz's synthesizer, it was not rock and roll per se.
And he surrounded himself with tremendous musicians. I mean, yourself included, but like you say, Javier Cruz was terrific, and Larry Maslin. I mean, you could not perform that kind of music live unless this band was well rehearsed and tight.
Oh.
And there certainly was a big element of that with the way Jim was kind of putting you guys through the grinder there.
Oh, we were through the grinder. There was no day off from rehearsal, and I'm not exaggerating that. We rehearsed 7 days a week, and rain or shine, sick or healthy, we rehearsed. And this band was well rehearsed, and it was unique the way it would come together. I mean, he never told me exactly what I had to play, but he would make suggestions of what he wanted to hear, what he wanted to feel. And then it was up to me to pull that out of myself and interject it to his music. I mean, he did have some top-notch musicians. I mean, Greg Sarche, the first bass player, of course, went on to be the principal bass player of the Lyric Opera and still is. I mean, he's tremendous. He went through, several music schools, and later on, the bass player, Lee Gatlin, who we did on that show, that tour with the Police, he was from Minneapolis. He played with Prince for a while, and I mean, he was just a tremendous bass player. And Javier was beyond on keyboards.
As a half-rate drummer myself, when I hear music that may be unfamiliar, and I tend to listen to what's going on in the rhythm section first sometimes, and I'm listening to what you're playing, and I'm listening to Joan Fan Club, for example. It's a pretty unique pattern you got. And I'm just listening to it, and saying, wait a minute, I have to listen to that again. What is he doing? As a guy, like I said, a half-rate drummer who, struggled to figure out a paradiddle, I was blown away by what you did. I mean, it's remarkable work for a debut album. I mean, you could not do that unless you guys knew exactly what you were doing.
Exactly. We went into the studio knowing exactly how the songs were going to be played. And but at that in that respect, the albums never, to my opinion, this is my opinion, do justice to what we sounded like live. I wish there was a live recording of a good one, not these tape cassette players that people, but I mean a really good live recording, because the live recording was so much more electric, in my opinion, as was the first and second album. And like I say, on Sink or Swim or Sign It Across, I was drawing on my jazz influence, my Buddy Rich, roles and that type thing, to try to fit in what Jim was looking for.
When you got a guy like Miles Copeland calling Jim, the actual quote was a fucking genius, and calling you his second favorite drummer behind his brother Stuart. Obviously this is a guy who's blowing you up pretty good. And IRS Records is an emerging independent label at the time, and they're getting a bigger roster as the years go by. In your opinion, though, when the first album came out, what stood in its way? I mean, when I listen to it now, I'm thinking, my God, what a great record. And in 1978, 79, I probably would have loved it for the rest of my life. What do you think stood in the way of that becoming the classic record that it should have been?
It wasn't promoted.
Yeah,
that's my opinion directly. I mean, he put it out there, and see, Miles did that with bands. I mean, if you know the story of the Police, he didn't dump money into bands. I mean, the Police went on their first tour of America, riding around in a van, a regular small, van and played little shows, hundreds of little shows all over the place for probably little or money or whatever, enough to cover expenses. He didn't dump like major record companies, Arista or Elektra or whatever, dumping. You get a $100,000 advance, and then we're going to promote your album. And he didn't do that. He kind of recorded the album, pressed it, and I think he just kind of haphazardly promoted it to see if it would fly. It was never really, the money was never put into it to push that album. And secondly, I think because at the time it was still too unique for what people were listening to. Like I say, we were still in the age of dinosaurs. We were still REO, Styx, that type music. So when the first album came out, it wasn't conventional enough to sell to the mainstream public. I mean, the people that were into that bought it, but there were not enough people at that point.
Right.
That was 1980, I believe.
It's interesting because if you go and watch, and YouTube's got the clip of this, you guys playing it on Erg the Music War, and you're playing Sign of the Cross in that film, and you listen to how it sounds live. I mean, I think you're right. I think there's no way to replicate the kind of power that band had on a record that wasn't promoted and didn't sell. I think if people really want to know what that band was about, that footage is really what speaks the loudest of maybe anything that's ever been released on Skafish.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, it was sacrilegious, but see, if people would realize why Jim did that, it's because he was so brutally put down by, the church and all that when he was growing up. Because, I mean, we were all raised Catholic in East Chicago, Indiana, and like I say, he went through, Catholic schools, and he was put down, and he saw the abuse, and so that's what it's basically was his way of saying, I don't believe in this conventional type religion.
Right. So when I talked to him, because he's getting ready to release the second album, The Conversation, and a bunch of rejected songs, and then to me, the second album is a fascinating story because you guys record the record, it gets presented to IRS, and then Miles Copeland, who had been as supportive as he could have been in the early part of your career, suddenly turns and rejects 8 songs off that record, many of which have never been heard.
Yes,
and it feels like a remarkable turn of events, and I'm so glad that Jim is getting ready to release that stuff so people can hear what that stuff was all about. When Miles Copeland rejected that music, what was the feeling of the band? It had to be completely demoralizing.
It probably demoralized Jim a lot. And see, at that point, I had moved to California, and I was already touring with Iggy Pop. And what I was doing was flying back to record. An interesting story. I had a show with Iggy at night somewhere in the Midwest. This happened on a couple occasions. And during the morning, I would take a flight out. Jimmy Sands, of course, the lead singer of the Shadows of Night, he was our tour manager, He would pick me up at O'Hare Airport, drive me to Pumpkin Studios, Gary Loizo Studios, where I would record my tracks, my drum tracks. I would fly back in the afternoon. I'd had to miss the sound check, obviously, and then play the show with Iggy that night. And I remember I had to ask Iggy's permission. I call him Jim. Hey, they want me to record some songs. You mind if I take off? And he goes, no, they can borrow my drummer, And so it was so crazy. I would fly into Chicago, record my tracks, and fly back. I didn't have my drum set. I don't know what set I used. So actually, I don't even remember the songs that I recorded because there was so much going on. And I do know that Miles made him pick some really soft sell songs. They weren't the ones that we initially recorded. So yeah, I'm interested to hear that too. I don't even know how my performance is on those songs though.
I'm really looking forward to it. It sounds like it's going to be great, and Jim is really excited about it. You can certainly really sense that he's just itching to get this thing finally finished. I want to ask you about Iggy Pop here a little bit because I find it somewhat ironic that you go from a band where the audience wants to kick the shit out of you to a band in which the audience is probably the one more likely to get the shit kicked out of them by Iggy. So Tell me about that and how you got involved with him.
Well, that's interesting. What had happened in early 1981 in January, I decided to move out to Los Angeles, California, because I wanted to sample what's going on out there and see. That's when the Skafish album, like I say, was not selling. I talked to Jim about it, and he says, yeah, go. That way you can get some prospects, see what's going on out there. We'll still keep the band together, which was nice, So I moved out to L.A. I started to get a regular job in a health food store. I was always into health foods, by the way. And I'm working, and I called Miles Copeland up because we kept in contact. And like I say, he liked me. So he was living in Hollywood. I give him a call. I says, Miles, I'm looking for a band. If anything comes up, would you please give me a call? Well, I think a couple months go by, and I get a call from Miles, and he goes, hey, Lair, Iggy Pop is looking for a drummer. He's going on tour shortly. I go, okay. He goes, I gave him your number, and here's his number. Give him a call, and you guys take it from there. But I told him, you're the guy. You're the guy he needs to do this tour. So I called Jim up, or Iggy up. He says, send me a tape just so I can hear a little bit of what you did. But we had toured with Iggy before, so he maybe he didn't pay attention. I don't know. So I sent him the tape. He writes me a letter, which I still have. I had that posted on Facebook a while back. And he says, yep, my tour manager will be calling you up in a few days, set up the rehearsals in New York and blah, blah, blah. Went on from there. And so 2-3 weeks later, I'm flying to New York, and we're rehearsing up in a loft up in New York. And then we did the tour, started in October of that year. That was 82. But Miles Copeland was the one who hooked me up. And I didn't even have to do a live audition because Miles told him, his word was good enough, I guess. I don't know.
This is at a weird time for Iggy, too, because he had just come off of, I think, the release of Zombie Birdhouse, which he recorded with Clem Burke and Chris Stein from Blondie and Robbie Dupree from the Mumps. But there's a block of time between that and his next album, which I don't think he recorded anything until like 4 years later. Did you actually wind up recording anything with Iggy, or was it all on the road?
Well, there is a live album that I just found a few weeks ago, and it's a live album of us. It's called, let's see, Iggy Pop, Your Pretty Face is Going to Hell. And it's a recording, someone captured a recording we did on October 28th in 1982 during the Zombie Birdhouse tour. It was recorded live in Toronto, and it has 18 songs on it. And like I say, I found a copy on eBay, actually. I don't know how, but so that's the only thing, plus I don't know if you ever saw the footage of us on the tube.
Yes.
That is a really cool footage of
I did see
us playing on the tube in December 17th of 82.
Iggy Pop is, obviously now the second, legendary genius you've now worked with.
Yeah. Yeah, he really has taken off.
His reputation by the time you're playing with him had already been cemented. Everything from the Stooges to, those albums with David Bowie and now.
Bowie, yes.
And he's, now he's still recording really great albums. I mean, Zombie Birdhouse is a really good album, and he's, a couple years away from blah, blah, blah. What is it?
Rob Dupree wrote the music, most of the music. He collaborated with Iggy on that Zombie Birdhouse album. Rob had been with him since 1980, I believe.
It's a totally underrated record. But what is it like to be on the road with him? My understanding, for people that I know that have talked to him, and I have unfortunately not yet had a chance, is there's really kind of two people operating there.
Absolutely.
And then there's Jim Osterberg.
For the second time, I got it years ago. It's called Iggy Pop, Open Up and Bleed. If you can find it, it is the most, how can I say, thorough book on his life from the beginning till around 1986 or 88, I think it goes. But this book really chronologically goes through every stage, and I don't know how this Paul Trenka, I believe, is I contacted him the other day too. He's the author, and if you can ever find it, I mean, it's definitely out there. You can get it on probably Amazon or eBay. Open Up and Bleed. It really goes through his stages, and he was going up and down different stages. Of course, his history with drugs and
Sure.
all that. But yeah, it was unique. I mean, there was some really cool times and some really scary times. I mean, I remember when the Hells Angels invaded our dressing room in London the day before we did that Tube live TV show, by the way. And I guess what happened on the tour before, he had done something to piss him off. I don't know what it was. You'd have to ask Rob Dupre, I think, because he was on that tour. And they invaded our dressing room, and they didn't harm us physically, but they let us know that at any moment shit could break loose.
Yeah.
And so they drank our liquor or whatever they had. They ate our food, and it was kind of like, hey, we're in charge here.
I've seen Iggy a couple of times live, and every time it's mind blowing that this guy has just so much energy and presence. I mean, it's simply not human. I know.
I just saw him on March 11th in Chicago at the Salt Shed, and he still has the same amount of energy. And yeah, I mean, we always laughed in the band. We always used to say, if there's a nuclear war, we'd all be blown away. And all of a sudden, Iggy would crawl up from the rubble. And that's pretty much it. I mean, he's indestructible in my opinion.
But as an individual, like say there's a second aspect of him, the Jimmy, Osterberg part of him. What kind of guy is? What kind of guy? I mean, he's a very intelligent, well-spoken type of guy, and I don't know if people really get that, or they just think of him just cutting his chest and smearing peanut butter all over the place.
Right, and if you read Paul Trenka's book, he explains that it's the classic Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. When Iggy is on, he's brutal, he's mean, he's forceful. And then the side of Jim Osterberg is very well read, very intelligent, very like I say, I mean, how can I say it? Getting along with people and being very nice to people. I mean, I've seen both sides. I can tell you a story. About a month into our tour, when I signed up with him, I was talking to him, and he goes, by the way, he goes, Clem Burke, what happened, how I got the job was Clem Burke did the album, he did the tour before, but Blondie was supposed to go on a tour, I believe, of Japan and get back together because they had been on a hiatus.
Right.
And so he says, I can't do the tour, Jim. I'm out. I'm going with Blondie. Well, that's when I got the call. About a month into the tour, Jim goes, by the way, about a week after I hired you, Clem called and says, hey, we're not doing the tour. I can do the tour. And believe it or not, Jim Osterberg told him, nope, I already hired this guy. He's quit his job. He's already preparing to come out here. I'm sorry, Clem, but I already told him he's got the job. Now, to me, all he had to do was call me up and say, hey, by the way, buddy, Clem's in. He did the album. He knows the songs. But he's a nationally known drummer. He didn't do that.
Yeah.
He honored his commitment. And if that tells you what Jim Osterberg is like, I think that's all you need to say.
That's amazing. And, it's not so unlike stories I've heard about David Bowie and his loyalty to people around him. And I got to believe that that's a two-way street between the two of them because, I mean, they collaborated. I mean, they would continue to collaborate even after you were done, playing with him. What eventually led to you leaving his band?
Well, it wasn't my choice. What happened was after we finished our last tour we rehearsed in Hawaii. That's another cool story. He decided that New York was too cold or whatever. He was sick of New York. Let's go to Hawaii and rehearse and do some shows before we go to Japan. So he put us up. We were on Waikiki Beach and we stayed at the Ilokai Hotel, a beautiful hotel. We rehearsed like 3 hours a day. And the rest of the time was ours, driving around the island, eating pineapples, whatever, laying on the beach. So we went to Hawaii. We did some shows there. We flew over to Japan, and then we did some shows. We did about 2 or 3 weeks in Australia. But at that point, he got kind of fed up with everything and just disbanded the band. He says, I'm done. I want to go back to L.A. and whatever. So he kind of quit us. We didn't quit him. So he kind of quit us, and then he didn't do anything for a few years, and I think not until 85 or 86 did he start recording, and he got a whole new band out of England. In fact, I don't know if you know who Gavin Harrison is.
Yeah.
Yeah, he plays with King Crimson now and Porcupine something. He actually replaced me as the next drummer. So I feel kind of wild. It was like I had Clem Burke on one side of me, and then Gavin Harrison, who's an incredible drummer, who joined up with Iggy on the other side.
If you're going to be replaced by anybody, Gavin Harrison wouldn't be a bad choice, I suppose.
Yeah, that's a good choice.
So after that band disperses and Iggy's on to other things, what did you do after that? I mean, obviously you're still playing music. I think you were teaching for a while. What did you wind up doing?
Well, I stayed in L.A. until around 1988, and at that point I was playing in different bands. I did some recording, with different bands and that type of thing. I always stayed in the music thing, but it never turned back out to where I toured with Iggy or anything like that. We actually, Skafish did a tour in California after that time. We went up and down the coast, and we did a tour. But that was the last hurrah as far as the Skafish band. I believe that might have been 86. I can't recall, but I believe it was around 86 we did a tour around California. Scott Cameron. Scott had an office out there in L.A. So I got to visit him frequently. In fact, it was cool. One day, Scott calls me and says, "Hey, it's Willie Dixon's birthday. Do you want to come down to his house and for his party?" So I got to go to Willie Dixon's house out in California, there in L.A. somewhere, and go to his birthday party. And that was through Scott Cameron.
It's I went on to Wikipedia, and it said that you had become a police officer in northern Indiana. Is that right?
That's absolutely correct. After I gave up professionally music, I'm not the type of person that could stock a shelf or sit in an office. That just wasn't me. I've always been a hands-on person. I mean, I studied a lot of martial arts. I took a lot of, martial arts training, lifted weights like a maniac and, that kind of thing. So I always I wanted to do something that was hands-on and physical, and I did become a police officer, and I did that for over 30 years.
Wow. What's more dangerous, being a cop in northern Indiana or opening up for Sha Na Na?
I think Sha Na Na, because you have no weapons or nothing to protect you.
Well,
You're vulnerable. Sha Na Na wasn't the only time we got pelted. We got pelted. We did Chicago Fest on Navy Pier, and we got pelted with. I could see sandwiches flying by me. I started tilting my cymbals a little bit, just like Ringo said. He used to tilt his cymbals a little bit when it got crazy, and we got pelted. When we opened for Iggy, Iggy got pelted with eggs. I remember back then when we did some shows with him, like at Beginnings and stuff. And for some reason, that was a thing these people thought was the thing to do. I remember Milton Keynes, when we opened for the Police on that big outdoor show, Jim got hit with a bottle, I believe, or something. It was one of those times he got hit in the head with a bottle. So it was dangerous. I think I was more protected doing my conventional police job.
You did have sticks you could throw back, and we always had that.
I did have sticks, and like I say, I was trained. So if anything got really physical, I would hope that I could defend myself. But you can't defend when you're playing that a bottle's flying at your skull. That's something that. And Jim took the most of the hits. I'll be honest with you, Jim really was the warrior as far as that went. He took most of the direct hits, as did Iggy. Some of the Iggy things we did. He was getting whacked. And when he'd get pissed, he would just turn to the band and go, "Louie, Louie." And we would launch into about a 20-minute version of Louie, Louie. And he would taunt the audience. You know that from reading his history. And if you read that book, you'll really know it. But yeah, he would taunt the audience. And he got laid out a few times, not when I was with him, but I read on the other tours, and Rob has told me one time he got just some guys off it. I don't know if they were in France or whatever, and they chased the whole band back to the band bus, and Iggy disappeared and got away unscathed, but the whole band got their ass beat up.
I'm sorry.
It's dangerous. This is rock and roll wasn't the Jelly Beans with the Beatles and all that kind of thing. It was like gird your loins, baby, because we're up for some heavy stuff,
And I just can't see guys like Kevin Cronin doing that with REO, or Dennis DeYoung doing that with Styx. I just don't see them being those kinds of guys.
I think it was just the type of audience that the more out there bands, the dangerous bands attracted. They didn't attract the And that's why, going back to your question about the Skafish album, that's why it didn't sell that great, because the mainstream fans didn't come to these concerts.
What's so interesting to me is in listening to the things that Jim has reissued, and really feeling like, in a way I feel bad, because I think the world has been denied of this music for so long, with it being out of print and largely unavailable. I keep hearing the word genius thrown around with Jim Skafish, and it is very hard for me to argue against that, based upon the vision he had, the talent he had, who he surrounded himself with. And to me, it's like one of those great musical mysteries. Like, how could this not have been enormous? And I agree with you. Lack of promotion. Maybe he was too far ahead of the curve. But in your opinion, does the word genius fit a guy like Jim Skafish?
I believe that would have to be what your opinion of genius is. Is Albert Einstein a genius? Yes, he's been noted as a genius for his his theories and his developments and all that. The guy that invented the light bulb, he's a genius. Is he a genius? I mean, I think the word genius applies to anyone that works very hard and comes up with something that no one else has been able to come up with. And in that respect, Jim Skafish is a genius. He came up with music that no one had done or has done since. I mean, no one has done this. I mean, there's a lot of avant-garde music, and there's a lot of great music, but it wasn't unique in the way Jim presented his life story. And that's what his music is. His music is his life story. And I think Iggy Pop is a genius. I mean, to come through so many pitfalls and ups and downs and continue at 75 years old to still be belting out one hell of a show. I mean, the guy should have been dead 40 years ago.
There aren't that many 75-year-old men that could get away with singing Raw Power and everyone still believes it.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's absolutely a fact. Larry, your career is just so interesting to me. I mean, to have had the opportunity to be, in both of these bands and, have, a life outside of it, and to emerge as a guy who's just relaxing in Tomahawk, Wisconsin. I applaud you, and I feel envious of you, because I mean, you're a remarkable talent, and the stories are fantastic.
Well, I don't know about that. I mean, I've had my time, and now I still play locally. I still love playing drums. I'm a drum collector. I've collected several different drum sets. I tend to collect vintage drums. I look for, vintage drums, and I've gotten some really nice ones that I found either in pawn shops or at drum shows and all that. I still continue to go to the Chicago Drum Show. I still play a lot of gigs around town, and I'm not ready to quit yet, but no, I mean, it's been one hell of a ride.
So I'm just out of curiosity. You have several drums, vintage drums. What's your prized possession right now?
Well, I have a beautiful old early 60s Camco. I have the Ringo sets, the Ludwig Black Oyster Pearls. I have several of those. I have old Sonar with the teardrop lug. I mean, you'd have to come and see them. The basement is just shellacked. The walls are shellacked with drums. And I have a 1931 or 32 Ludwig engraved Black Beauty snare drum. I mean,
wow.
Gongs. I still have 3 gongs. I sold my timpani, my beautiful King George marimba, which was unique. I bought that when I was going to DePaul because I needed an instrument to practice. I found out that this instrument, the King George marimba, was one of 100 specially made by Deegan for 100 marimba people that were going over to London to do a show. I mean, 100 people put together this. I mean, they had 100 people in this marimba group that went over on a boat, and these were made in 1939. Like an idiot, sometime in the early 80s or mid 80s, I should say late 80s, I sold it, and I'm still kicking myself for that.
When I was in college, I sold my first kit, and it was an old vintage Slingerland Radio King, blue sparkle.
Oh my God!
It was.
Yes.
And I sold it for $400 so I could buy textbooks. And I regret that, because I got a hell of a lot more out of those drums than I ever did out of those books or a
Those
college.
textbooks.
Right, absolutely. And I always kicked myself, and that was just a great set.
Well, they're still available.
I know they
You
are.
can still find Radio King drums. You got to watch because a lot of them are out of round. Like I say, because the way they were made. But yeah, they're still available. I mean, you might pay a little more than $400 for them now, but yeah, I mean, go to vintage drum shows. Those people all the vendors bring all their stuff, and it's really a cool thing to do.
I think if I brought more drum equipment into my house, my wife would have my ass for dinner.
I think mine's given up. I mean, after it's just something that I do, and I provide. I don't hold back. I don't keep other people wanting. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, I know. I know exactly what you're saying.
Needs.
Yep. Once that bug gets in you, it's very, very hard to let it go. I mean, you always look. You're always looking. You're always kind of shopping, even if you have no intention to buy. You got to see, well, what's that guy got? There's no way to.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just went to the Chicago Drum Show was on May 20th and 21st, so I went to that, and you're like a kid in a candy store. I mean, there's just thousands and thousands of drums and parts and cymbals and new and vintage and new.
I think that's our drug, Larry.
It is my drug.
It is. It's totally
It is
a
my
drug.
Like I say, I didn't do drug. I was mostly into martial arts, bodybuilding, and health food. So drums were my drug. Playing drums are my drug. And to me, it's better than getting drunk.
It's more productive. Feels better. That's
Yeah.
for sure. Yeah. Larry, it's such a pleasure to talk to you. I appreciate the time, while you're away on vacation, and it's been a lot of fun. So thank you so much.
I hope it's something worthwhile for you, and you're happy with it.
I'm totally happy with it. Larry, thank you very much. Have a great afternoon.
All right, you too.
You bet.
Take care.
And there you have it. Listen, do yourself a favor. Find yourself some Skafish and listen to it. It is absolutely incredible. And that second album is on the way, perhaps as early as sometime this year. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. Feel free to like it, share it, tell all your friends about it. Also, thanks to Z&M Home Buyers for their support. You can follow me on all the socials and email me at backs@rock102.com. I'd love to know what you think. And thanks again for listening to Baxi's Musical Podcast.